All right, welcome to Concept 2.9 International Trade and Public Policy. Let's dive right in. So, we're going to be looking at limitations on trade, or the reason the government puts regulation on trades like tariffs and quotas to impact imports. The idea is that we've been kind of operating off of a false premise this whole time. We've been assuming that domestic supply and domestic demand creates our domestic price. But in reality, prices, especially for goods that are exchanged internationally, prices are international as well. So we have something called the world price. The world price is set by all of the competing markets in the entire world that work together to create an international equilibrium price. And this price rules all. If you have a good that can be internationally exchanged, a market where the good is internationally exchanged, then the world price is the overriding price. And it hits your market much like a price ceiling or a price floor would. And I'll show you that in a second. So if the world price is greater than the domestic price, then it's going to create a surplus. And that surplus produced is going to result in exports from our market. So let's take a look at this graph right over here. So if this graph actually shows a low world price, but I'll show you a high one too. Change your color here. So if the world price was up here, right? If this was PW, so down here we have our domestic price set by equilibrium from our domestic supply and our domestic demand. But if we have a world price way up here, it's going to operate a lot like a price floor. We have two collisions. We're at disequilibrium, right? Our demand is going to be lower. So this is going to be QD domestic. That's our domestic demand right there. It's low because the international price is too high. I can't pay my domestic price. I don't want to pay that high world price. So we demand very little here in the United States, for example. But the second intersection way over here is the quantity supplied domestically. So QS domestic. Hard to type. All right. So quantity supplied is going to be very, very high, and that makes sense. Businesses are like, we're going to produce a ton of this because the world price is so high. We're not producing it to give it to people in the United States or sell it to people in the United States. We're going to sell it internationally. As a result, domestically, we have a surplus. Our domestic producers produce a whole bunch of goods, and our domestic demanders don't want much of it. What do we do with that surplus we produce? That becomes exports. Okay, so that's one side of it. World price is above it, it creates a surplus. We export that surplus because our domestic demand goes down and our domestic supply goes up because of that international price. Okay, on the other side of it, if the world price is lower than domestic price, it's going to create a shortage and create imports. And this is the one that the government gets involved to try to fix. We don't really care if we have surplus and we have exports because businesses are making money from that. But we do care about shortage. So let's check it out. If the world price is undercutting our domestic price, as it is here, P world is low, domestic price is high from our equilibrium. Well, it operates like a price ceiling. You dash over, you have two collisions, collision B and collision C. At the first collision, that's my supply curve. So that's going to be my quantity supplied domestic. And that should make some sense. Domestic producers can't compete at this low price, right? They have to pay their labor too much, or they have to, they have certain regulations on them, or the taxes are high. So like, we can't produce that much. So they produce very, very little domestically. However, people like you and me are like, sweet, low prices. We want all the goods, right? We don't care if it's an import. We don't care if it's made abroad. We want it and we are willing to demand it. So quantity demand is very, very high. This quantity demand creates a shortage, as I will show you right now, right? So we have very low demand or very low supply, sorry, domestic supply, very high demand. And so that creates a shortage. What do we do to fulfill that shortage? Well, unlike a price ceiling where that shortage persists, in international exchange, a shortage results in imports. And so we will import to satisfy those domestic. In other words, our shortage equals the quantity that's imported. This is where businesses get upset because domestic businesses are losing money. International businesses are getting our money from those imports. It's leakage from our economy. Our domestic businesses feel like they can't compete. They're laying people off. People are unemployed, and it has a dramatic negative effect on our economy. In steps the government. Okay, So hopefully I made a little bit of sense. So impact on consumer and producer surplus is pretty substantial. When we have a very, very low world price here, remember, this is now my operating price. So let me jump over here, get some, let's go purple. Purple's a nice surplus color. So we know that it's always going to be below demand, but I don't have to cut it off anymore at this because I can import the remaining goods. Below demand, above price. My price is my world price, my operating price. So even though only this much is produced within our economy, we can still get the rest of this through imports. So it all counts as a quantity. This giant thing here, it's consumer surplus. Consumers win, right? But the challenge is the other side of it, producer surplus. Producer surplus is above supply, below price. This is above supply and below price. It's this tiny little triangle. I can barely put a P and an S in there. Tiny producer surplus. That's the problem. Producers feel like they can't compete, and so they want to fix that in the market. Let's take a look at this. Okay, so we'll look at that one more time. I'll make myself small. So if we're purchasing goods at a lower world price, so currently before we have a world price impact us, our consumer surplus is below demand, above price right here. And our producer surplus is above supply, below price right there. Equilibrium, fully efficient, total surplus is maximized. There's no deadweight loss. That's where we want to be. But if this starts getting international exchange, what do? Well, now we have a new world price way down here at $2, below our equilibrium price of $5. As a result, my producer surplus is going to be tiny, above supply, below price. And my consumer surplus is going to be enormous, above price, below demand, this giant consumer surplus. Remember, I don't have to cut it off at this quantity because my shortage is not permanent. My shortage is incomplete. In fact, I'm going to import to cover all of those lost goods. So the quantity that's actually being supplied is only 7 down here. And domestically, the quantity we demand is 13. So we are going to import that shortage. And so we're going to import 6 units to cover that gap. So consumers win. Woo! But what's the government going to do? Well, they're going to get involved. The government's going to try to fix this. And the main way the government fixes this, and we saw this just a year or earlier this year, is through tariffs. If they tariff this good, they will take money away from international businesses. They will restore it to the producer surplus. But in doing so, they're going to create deadweight loss and they're going to rob from consumers. Let's take a look. So if I'm increasing the price from $2 or I'm adding a $2 tariff, what I'm actually going to be doing is increasing the price from $2 to $4. It's just world price plus my tariff. That's going to be my new price. Okay? So, oops, sorry. So I'll show you this on a graph in a second. I'll show you here too as well. This is going to be my new operating world price plus tariff. It will change my producer surplus to be a larger triangle. My consumer surplus will be smaller. And then this little trapezoid down here is going to be a fun little government revenue deadweight loss double triangle thing. I'll show you that in a second. Oh, let's get some words down first. So we use quotas and tariffs. Quotas are very, very rare. I'll show you one in class, but they're very rare on the actual exam. So we're going to spend our time on tariffs. Tariff is a tax on imports that increases the world price. We push the world price up on purpose to help our producers out. A quota is just a limit on the number of imports, and that looks like a perfectly vertical international supply curve. We'll talk about that later. The purpose of this is to protect domestic producers from cheap world prices. Oftentimes they call it undercutting or price dumping, where another business or another nation undercuts our profits or prices on purpose to steal away our business. It's a way to kind of win in international economics. And the other thing that they're doing this for is they want to ramp up unemployment or ramp up employment, I should say. You might have heard of people losing their jobs to other nations. You might have heard of our industry, for example, our steel industry completely disappearing, but being enormous in China. Those types of things are caused by world prices that undercut our domestic prices. Okay, let's get into it. What's it look like? It looks like this. I'll break this down for you. We originally had a world price of $2. We had a huge consumer surplus, tiny producer surplus. We had a $2 tariff. That $2 tariff is just added onto our world price. So now we have a functional price of $4. That $4 is just world price plus tariff. Now, again, follow the rules. For consumer surplus, it's going to be below demand, above price. Remember, I'm not cutting it off at this quantity supplied right here like I would before. There's no chopper because even though I have a shortage, I import to cover that shortage so it doesn't persist. So consumer surplus is big, but it's not nearly as big as it used to be. It used to be this giant triangle. Now it's smaller. So consumer surplus falls. However, producer surplus went from being this tiny little triangle down here, below $2, above supply, to being a larger triangle. So by implementing a quota or a tariff, my producer surplus goes up, which was my goal all along. Ding, ding, ding. Great job. But what do we do to the market itself? Well, we created government revenue for what it's worth, but we also created deadweight loss. So we created an inefficient marketplace. Let's take a look. Remember, your government revenue is just tax times quantity. That's your tax revenue or government revenue, same as these, right? So our tax is $2, shown by this height right here, 2 to 4. That height is your tax. The quantity that is taxed is just what's imported. In other words, the quantity that is taxed is our new shortage after tax. New shortage. Our new shortage is 9 to 11. 9 is my new quantity supplied domestically, and 11 is my new quantity demanded domestically. And so we are going to import 2 units. We show that area as this box right here. It's the height of our tax, $2, and it's the breadth or the width of our tax of 2 units. So government revenue is going to be $4. $2 times 2 unit, $4. Okay, what happened to these 2 triangles? This one here and this one over here are deadweight loss. They used to be a part of consumer surplus. They aren't anymore. A portion of it goes to the government. The rest of it is just lost surplus. So we have created an inefficient market as a result. That's it. So see if you can do this on this little graph here. Can you identify consumer surplus with no trade? Yeah, consumer surplus with no trade. If we have a functional price of PW, it's going to be H, I, J, K, L, M, N, R, and S. This giant triangle right here is going to be my consumer surplus. I'm sorry. It asks for consumer surplus with no trade. So that's without a functional world price. So that's going to be right here. I'm not redoing the video. That's right here. Equilibrium price and quantity. And so my consumer surplus would be H. Okay. Next question is, what about producer surplus with no trade? That's just above supply, below price. So that's going to be I, L, and T, right? This is my operating price. Below that, I, L, and T, I, L, T. Next one, amount we import at a world price of PW. If PW, I'm going to change colors here. If PW is now my functional price, then I dash over this first intersection. That's my supply curve. So this is going to be QS. I keep going. The second intersection is at my demand curve. So that's going to be my QD. So quantity supplied domestically is Q1. Quantity demanded domestically is very high at Q5. The amount I import is that shortage, which is going to be Q1 to Q5. Remember, whenever you have a world price, you import a surplus. I'm sorry, you import a shortage, you export a surplus. Okay, what is our producer surplus if we trade at this point? If we're trading at this point, my producer surplus is going to be above supply, below my functional price, which is world price. So it's just going to be T. What about consumer surplus? I answered this right at the beginning. Consumer surplus is below demand, above my new price. And again, I don't have to chop that off because we can import that shortage. So it's going to be H, I, J, K, L, M, N, R, and S. I'm not, well, I guess I could. H, I, J, K, L, M, N, R, and S. Giant consumer surplus. If the government tariff leads to a world price of PT, how much is imported? What is consumer surplus and producer surplus? So it's saying our new tax is PT. So let me change this to, let's go blue. So PT is now my functional price. This becomes my price. My consumer surplus is going to be below demand, above price. So it's going to be H, I, J, and K. My producer surplus is going to be above supply, below price. So it's going to be T and L. Now I have this weird sort of area right here, this trapezoid, M, N, R, and S. What is my government revenue? Well, government revenue is going to be N and R. It's my per unit tax, which is PW to PT, and it's my new quantity imported, which is going to be Q2 to Q4. So N and R are my government revenue. So I have two things left on here, and those two things are M and S, and those used to be a part of surplus. They're nothing anymore, and that is my dead weight loss. A whole lot from one simple graph. All right, friends, that's the last concept for this. Check out your Khan Academy 2.9, and I will see you again in class where we'll break this down step by step for you one more time. All right, peace.